Hello, everybody. It is Saturday night at 9 o'clock Eastern Time, and my name is Chris Weave, and this is Starfleet Tactical. I am solo this evening. I do not have Lissa. She is off. I want to say somebody's in town visiting or something like that. She told me, and I just don't remember what she told me. But today's episode is going to be a follow-up to last week's episode. It is not, however, the follow-up that I promised you. Basically, when it came time, when I sat down to do it, I realized that I had them out of order, that I was going to be, that for the next week's episode, I'll refer back to some of the stuff from this week's episode, and it didn't make sense to do an episode where I was going to be referring to stuff I hadn't talked about yet. So it was just easier to swap them around, so I swapped them around. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and launch my slide deck. And this is another one of what I call the get in touch with your inner 12-year-old episodes. Specifically, we're talking about a fandom design that has showed up in the current online support for FASA's Star Trek Starship Combat Simulator game, and it showed up in a bunch of other sources, and it eventually actually even showed up in the Ships of the Line calendar. Or actually, the Belknap showed up. The ATHABASKA has not shown up in that, so my apologies. I got that wrong. It's the ATHABASKA Class Cruiser, which is a follow-on to the Belknap design that we talked about last week. So the usual admin slide. The only change in this slide is that I alphabetized the stuff under the quick turn thing. It's never been presented in the order that I expected to do stuff. It's just the ones that I have as things that I could do relatively quickly to do. And so I alphabetized that. But otherwise, I expect that in July, I'm going to be around. Next week, I'm going to go someplace and rush home. I'm going to go to Pennsylvania, but then come home on Saturday in time for the show. So that shouldn't be an issue. I'm mostly done with, I'm about 75% done with next week's show already. I'm going to finish that tomorrow. And then in August, it's going to mostly be a yes. There's a probability actually that the 15th of August is going to be a no, come to think of it. That's the weekend before I have surgery. I have surgery on the 21st of August. I think on the 15th of August, I'm going to go to the Strategic Book and Game Reserve located at Beaver Valley Self-Storage in Beaver Creek, Ohio, to get a pile of stuff, bring it back as part of the ongoing move, and also to set up stuff for my brother when he comes through on his way to come play nurse for a week or 10 days. He's going to stop and spend the night at the same place I'm going to spend the night and pick up some stuff from there. So, okay, moving on. So the agenda for tonight, as I say, I switched the order of the shows because I realized you could slap a third nacelle on the ATHABASKA too. And so last week we talked about and you know what? Sorry about that. That's the wrong agenda. That's the agenda for next week's show. I forgot I hid the wrong one. It's the same sort of thing for this week's show. I'm going to do a little introduction. I'm going to talk about the ATHABASKA. I'm going to talk about a couple of variants, and then I'll sort of wrap it all up at the end. So this is a modification of the slide I did last week on sources. Todd Guenther is the originator of, I've been able to determine that, of the Belknap design, and he did a bunch of follow-on stuff with that. The strategic design blueprints were very, very useful in all of this. Aderivative stuff is on DeviantArt and is very, very useful in all of this. The Cygnus X1 website just continues to be the gift that keeps on giving. If you are a Star Trek fan and you're into the hardware, spaceships especially, and you do not have Cygnus X1 bookmarked, then you're missing out. And it's got a whole bunch of interesting stuff there. So there's all sorts of stuff where I've been pulling this stuff from, and I can't mention Cygnus X1 enough. Now, all the images that I'm using belong to their originators. I'm trying to critique them and use them for educational purposes. I am not asserting a copyright over any of these because it's not my stuff, it's other people's stuff, and you should heap adoring praise upon any of the ones that you encounter. So as you're going through here, here's some questions to sort of ask yourself. And these are good questions whenever you're looking at Star Trek designs. When fans start taking the pieces parts and rebuilding stuff, or even when, in canon sources, they start doing stuff, you should ask yourself these sorts of questions. What is the mission that they're trying to accomplish with this? What is the problem that they're trying to solve with this? What type of performance hit will the mods create? Like, if you add all this other stuff, it's like, okay, so I've now got 15 warp engines on. How much antimatter do I carry? Can I carry enough antimatter for 15 warp engines? What's the range look like? Maybe I can get there, I can get there tomorrow. I can go halfway across the universe tomorrow, but I don't have enough range to get back. So what good is that? How does this fit into Starfleet's larger shipbuilding plan? I mean, they can't put all their money in one ship. They're building a bunch of stuff, and so sometimes the right answer is you build a lot of stuff, and it's just not as good. I mean, the U.S. Navy does that. Everybody does that. Everybody's on a budget of some sort. Is it worth the effort to do the thing that they're trying to do? Like, okay, you're trying to solve this really exquisite problem. Is that a problem worth solving, or is that one that you should just sort of muddle your way through? And finally, I put it in the middle here, but it's really a good one. Like, sometimes you just look at this stuff and go, what were they smoking when they came up with that? There's a lot of the things that you see, these designs, where they start throwing nacelles on and stuff like that. And the analogy that I've come up with for that, it's like looking at an F-15 Eagle air superiority fighter and going, you know what that needs? It's got 2 wings and 2 vertical tail surfaces. What it really needs is 4 wings and 3 vertical tail surfaces. Wouldn't it be so much cooler if I did that? No, it wouldn't. So with that in mind, I have not tried to, and certainly next week with the dreadnoughts, I'm not trying to look at every possible iterations that somebody's taken something and started slapping shit on it, et cetera, et cetera. I had to draw a line somewhere. And so, like, especially for next week, there's some, oh my God, dreadnought designs that I just sort of decided to ignore. I'm going to talk about a handful of ones and what I think that makes sense. And I'm not going to go down that path. And I'm going to do that again tonight. And so tonight, we're going to talk, when we talk about the ATHABASKA class, I just realized in the agenda, I didn't tell you the pieces parts of this. There's going to be an intro. I'm going to talk about, and we're going to spend some time just sort of like ogling the artwork, and then I'm going to talk about the Knox class frigate for reasons that will be apparent. Then I'm going to talk about the Miranda, otherwise known as the Avenger in the older fan-produced stuff, the Avenger class frigate, the Miranda class from Star Trek Wrath of Khan for reasons that'll become apparent, and then I'll talk about some variants on the Athabasca and sort of wrap it all up at the end. Okay, so this is a variation of what I did last week, the history of the Belknap design. It was designed by Todd Guenther. I pretty much figured that out. It was a post-Star Trek Wrath of 2 design, but just barely. And so it's about the time that Star Trek 3 came out, actually, if I remember correctly, and it's unclear because they both came out in 1984 as to which one came out first. So it's post Wrath of Khan, and so we've already seen the Miranda class, and as you can look at the primary hull, you can see why we might be talking about the Miranda class tonight, because that kind of looks like a Miranda class that it's using as the primary hull. It actually looks exactly like a Knox class, because that is exactly what it's doing, apparently, is it's using a Knox class as the primary hull. But, the internals will probably change. How many warp cores do you need? It was an expansion of the USS Decatur idea, which I think maybe goes back long before this. I don't know whether Todd Guenther invented the Decatur, or whether it was one that previously had done, but at the very least, the backstory is that the Decatur was a original series era design that never got built, or maybe they talked about building a prototype at least, and then they actually ended up building something. They built the USS Decatur, but they built it with the new warp engines and sort of the new system as sort of a supplement to the Constitution II class ships, the upgraded Enterprises and her sister ships. It's a cool design that was immediately picked up by other sources. It was picked up and used in Starfleet Prototype, which is that one is David Schmidt. I think so. It was in Ships of the Starfleet, which is also by Guenther. There was blueprints that came out from Star Station Aurora and some others. And so there's been a lot of stuff on it. And it's a fan favorite. And oh my God, there's a ton of variants. And I even thought of some others. But now, I already talked about this a little bit. I don't want this show to be about just like more, give me more nacelles, give me more phasers, give me more photon torpedoes, et cetera, et cetera. And so when I saw a design that looked like it was just about more, I sort of ignored it. I was trying to look for designs that I thought had something interesting, because I want this show to be about thoughtful analysis of worthy creations, not just bigger, better, faster, how many things can I hang on it. And for a guy who's a military analyst in his day job, I don't want to overly focus on the military aspects of Starfleet, because I think Starfleet does a lot of things. The United States Coast Guard is a branch of the military. They will be the first to correct you on that if you say otherwise. I've had Coast Guard officers correct me on that. But do you think military, when somebody asks you what does the Coast Guard do, is the first thing that comes to mind their military mission? No, they do a lot of stuff, and Starfleet does a lot of stuff. And I think the problem with a lot of the fandom designs, etc., is that it assumes that Starfleet is first and last a military force that just happens to do some other stuff. I would argue it's a force that does a bunch of other stuff that happens to also be their military. And so that's sort of the approach that I take it when it comes to sort of filtering through this stuff. Okay, so let's take a couple of quick views, remind ourselves of what the Belknap looks like. It's got, it's generally in the same form factor, more or less, as a Constitution II class, or as it's classic Star Trek ship, except it's got this funky thing where the warp engines are connected to each other in a framework that includes the pylons that attaches to the bottom of the ships, which supposedly makes it attaches to the bottom of the secondary hull, which supposedly makes it routine detachable. And the secondary hull is smaller as well. Now, for me, that says the secondary hull has less cargo capability. It has less potentially smaller warp core. It's unclear to me exactly what the trade-off is there, but it's clearly got a trade-off in capability because starships are pretty packed. Now, I was making a joke to Pat Doyle and Andy Presby and some other people earlier today. We were talking about the Nebula versus the Galaxy class, and what they gave up for the Nebula. And the joke I made was, as near as I can tell, they probably gave up at least one of the concert halls, and they probably gave up the life-size replica of Stonehenge, because I think the Galaxy class is sort of a gold-plated design. It's got a lot of stuff in there that I kind of look at it and go, yeah, I know it's a 5-year mission, and I know that you're trying to keep the mental health of the crew together. I've been to sea. I kind of understand a little bit about this, although I never did a really long deployment. But it seems to me that there's a little bit of overkill, especially when they've got the holodeck. Why do you need an arboretum if you've got a holodeck? And so from that standpoint, I thought that design was a little bit overkill. But I do look at like the cutaways of the Constitution too, and sort of think about what is missing from that primary hull or that secondary hull on the Belknap. What did they have to give up? And I think it's mostly a lot of storage space, a lot of ability to take cargo places, and so that might make it a little bit less utility as an exploration ship. And this one really kind of seems to be focused more on being a quick reaction force. Now, it's probably worth talking a little bit about. Remember the time period of the movies, right? Because I think people sometimes lose track on this. Not only was Star Trek done as a TV show during the Cold War, but we're watching a Cold War on the show, right? We are seeing the Klingons become more and more of a threat. And by the time you get to Wrath of Khan, it's really looking like Starfleet is in the process of taking its military job more seriously because the threats to the Federation look like they're going up. And so you see Starfleet more and more focusing on the military aspects, and you can see in things like the Miranda class that they're building ships where the warship part of what they're designing is more and more important, right? You don't put a big photon torpedo pod and something called a mega phaser or phaser cannon or whatever they call those things. I've seen both used. You don't put that on a ship that you think its primary job is exploration. And I think with the Belknap class, you're starting to see something that looks like a little bit more of a reaction ship to increase the numbers in case there is combat. And tonight's ship, the ATHABASKA, is even more along those lines. So let's go and take a look at that. But first, let's compare with the Constitution class. I think it's worth actually doing this comparison. You can see that the Belknap is a little bit shorter. A lot of that has to do with the size of the secondary hull and where the engines attach. The engines attach back farther on the Constitution class. The primary hulls are the same size, the engines are the same size, but the secondary hulls are different and the pylons are different, and the dorsal neck structure is different. And it's actually interesting that the Belknap has a deeper neck, a longer neck, dorsal connector, and it's got that phaser, that little knob at the back of it is supposedly a phaser emplacement. And so the other thing you sort of get with that, there's a couple of places where it's like, oh, they're thinking more about fields of fire in their phasers. And so that's another reason to think that maybe it's more of a military design. Okay, so let's take a look at the ATHABASKA class. And this is another illustration. This is by Adrisil. Basically, if you see something that's in this color scheme, it's by Adrisil. He did fantastic work. It's listed as being an exploration cruiser. Okay, I thought that's what the Constitutions were. They're listed as heavy cruisers, but they were explorers. And so what makes this an exploration cruiser? I'm not sure that that's the words that I would use. And indeed, some of the other fandom designs just call it a heavy cruiser or something like that. It's got a Knox class frigate as a primary hull. So you've got these bays in the back. And so it's got the ability to have extra shuttles, et cetera, in addition to the hangar bay and the secondary hull. So that's kind of interesting. It's got those phaser emplacements, just like the Knox class has. And so from here, I'm going to do a little bit more looking at the ATHABASKA, and then I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive comparing the Knox and the Miranda Avenger to sort of let's nail down some of the details of that hull and what you get. And then I'm going to look at some odds and ends and some variants and stuff like that. Okay, so here's a better view. I sort of cut some stuff so I can make it bigger. And basically, it's a Belknap that replaces the primary hull with a Knox class frigate primary hull. It's not a Miranda. It's not an Avenger. That'll be clear momentarily. I don't think we fully have a history of the Miranda Knox relationship, but it looks to me, and it should look that way to you, when you see it, that what they looked at the Knox and they said, you know, we were that close. We were that close to getting it right. We just need a little bit more capability in that hangar bay and sort of maybe the stuff around it. I didn't spend a whole lot of time on the upper or lower decks. I focused on the hangar bay in the presentation. So there might be some other stuff there, but it's really about making the hangar bays bigger, a little bit bigger. Okay, so this is a comparison of the Knox to the Athabasca, and I think these illustrations are from the FASA Star Trek Tactical Combat Simulator website. They've got a lot of old artwork like this that came from various sources that they've sort of some of it has been redone and some of it's just sort of cut and paste stuff. But I put it up there like in case you doubt that it's a Knox class hull. Now I'll note, you might notice that there's those extensions of the hangar bay on the illustration on the right. And you see that in some of the Knox and Miranda class, especially the Knox class. Some of them just have these little extension pieces out there. It's not consistent across the board. It's not consistent on the Knox. It's not consistent on the Athabasca, whether it has those. I could easily invent some in-universe reason as to why they added those on. Maybe they decided they needed a little bit, it helps with to not have the shuttles actually landing directly in the bay, and so they come in and then they get winched into the bay. Maybe they decided that they didn't need that, so they subtracted it on the later ones. So maybe they added it, maybe they subtracted it. You can invent a story either way. But I did want to just basically put it out there so that if you've got any doubt, that is clearly based on a Knox class hull. They might have made some changes inside the hull. In fact, I expect they did, unless they really decided to just go with 2 warp cores. And so from that standpoint, that's pretty clear. Okay, so this is the strategic design blueprints. And so the next few things are going to be from them. There's a lot of, like, they've got a watermark on it. There's lots of stuff like that I just can't do anything with. And so I didn't even try. I just sort of cropped them as close as I could. And so there's a view of the Knox class and the Miranda/Avenger class. It's interesting. There's one of the various sets of blueprints out there. One artist, as near as I can tell, what he did was he called it the Avenger because that was the early name that people sort of called it before it was officially declared to be the Miranda class. And as near as I can tell, a year later, he reissued the exact same blueprints, but as the Miranda class, and then just went through and change the logo and stuff like that. But the blueprints appear to be exactly the same. I have not gone through in any sort of in-depth examination of that. But if I wanted to do that, the place I would go is, wait for it, Cygnus X1, that has all the stuff, basically almost all the stuff that's blueprinty in this thing I got from Cygnus X1. So in any event, you look at the Knox, which is on the top, obviously, and you compare it to the Miranda on the bottom. And the thing that sort of surprised me was that the Knox is actually longer because the engines sort of connect farther back on the primary hull a little bit. Not a whole lot, but enough to make the Knox a longer ship. Even though it's clearly got a much bigger displacement, it's got a lot of space in that area in the back. And we haven't talked about this in a while, but if you kind of like do the math, it's pretty clear that a Miranda is about the size of a Constitution. Do not be fooled by the fact that it doesn't have a secondary hull, because it's got so much more primary hull that altogether the internal volume of those 2 ships is about the same. Now, the details matter. I think the I'm one of the many people that think the Constitution has more performance in terms of speed. It's got a big ass navigational deflector, which I think gets you some speed because they're not having to do stuff with the warp field to try to knock stuff out of the way. Navigational deflectors are for ships that are fast. For ships that have to go long distances, they have navigational deflectors, and so that ship has a big navigational deflector, and it also has a much taller warp core. It's got a lot more opportunity to mix matter and antimatter together. This has got a lot smaller warp core, and so I think the power output is actually less, even though it's got those mega cannons, mega phasers. Okay. All right. So this is what the internals look like. And I put a red ellipse around oval around the warp core in both cases. You can see that the warp core on the Knox is really well positioned to just feed plasma directly into the struts going down to the engines, whereas the warp core in the Miranda has to sort of send it forward first and then down. And it's got a mechanism. You can see at the very top of the primary hull, there's a horizontal plasma pipe that goes over. And then if you look at the blueprints, you can see where it follows down. So I did trace all that stuff out. I didn't think it was worth sort of putting it all up here. But, you know, you've got this warp core. Do you keep it in the ATHABASKA class? It really is not taking up that much space, the warp core in and of itself. I mean, the plasma piping is going to take up some to move all that warp plasma around. But you could conceivably have a ship that's got an emergency warp core that, you know, it's capable of powering 2 of those engines, right? Because there's 2 of those engines on this ship. So maybe the answer is that it does have that emergency warp core, and that gives it a little bit of redundancy, which would potentially be kind of useful if you could just feed stuff in. Now, my guess is they'd feed it basically parallel to the regular warp core. So if you took damage in that area, you probably are still limited in exactly what you could do. But, you know, there's some interesting prospects there that that I will leave to the viewer to decide whether it's worth pulling the thread on that stuff. Okay, so here's a top view of the bottom deck for the hangar bay, because the hangar bay is basically a couple of decks tall. I've circled the warp cores. They really don't take up much space in the floor plan at all. And if you look at it, the overwhelming thing about this particular set of blueprints, now, this is strategic design's interpretation, right? There's no reason to think that this is any better than anybody else's. Maybe if I found, but I actually went looking for other Knox blueprints, and strategic design is the only guys that did Knox blueprints. So lots of people did Mirandas and Avengers, blah, 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 blah. They're the only ones who did Knox blueprints. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and give them the nod. But, you know, their interpretation of this is that it's basically the hull is exactly the same, and the only thing they did was basically move the impulse engines back and extend the hangar bays and then move the warp core back, right? That it's basically almost identical. There's maybe a little bit more space in that upper hangar bay area. And then they've certainly got more parking area in the back so they can carry more stuff. But the only real difference seems to be the extended flight bays. That shouldn't those pylons be thicker is a leftover comment. I forgot to delete that. You'll see that coming up. So this is another design, and this is where shouldn't those pylons be thicker? Yes, this is another design that somebody else came up with, the Icarus class missile strike cruiser. And when you look at it at first, what you see is on the side view, you see, okay, it's got, you know, it looks like the Decatur hull, right? I showed you last week that there was a prototype built that didn't have the photon torpedoes on it. on the neck of the dorsal. And so it looks like it's that hull. Oh, wait a minute, there's photon torpedoes over by the engines. And what they did here is they hung photon torpedo tubes down from the engines. And oh, look, there's extra engines. As I say here on the slide, I like this more than I really should. It's because it's dangerously close to the, let's just put some extra engines on it. I want more, I want more. And I look at it and I go like, okay, so, all right, I've got these forward and aft firing photon torpedo tubes. And so I've got basically 8 tubes instead of 2. Okay, that's kind of cool. I like that. But we know from seeing it in Wrath of Khan and that the torpedo room is a manned space. How does the crew get to those torpedo rooms there? Do they crawl up a Jeffries tube in the strut, in the pylon? Those pylons are carrying twice as many engines. Shouldn't they be thicker? If it's, isn't that going to lead to more torque or something? I mean, you would think that there would be, doesn't it need more space for warp plasma? So I question the pylons. Part of me questions the photon torpedo tube placement, unless you want to go to the idea that maybe they didn't have to have that space manned. Maybe they've automated it to the degree that they're comfortable with it being an unmanned space. Okay, maybe, quite possibly. The other thing I'd ask is, where do you store torpedoes? Because torpedoes take up space. Where do the torpedoes get stored? I can't answer that for this design, but I kind of like it. I'm not sure I would call it a missile strike cruiser. There's part of me that looks at this and goes like, this could be a battle cruiser. And I'm generally kind of skeptical about the term battle cruiser for reasons I'll explain in a moment. But, keep this design in mind for next week, because we're going to be talking about dreadnoughts, and, maybe dreadnoughts need to have battle cruisers as their complement. And so I could easily see a 4-engine battle cruiser. Doesn't it make sense that a 4-engine battle cruiser would be there to help out a 3-engine dreadnought? The battle cruiser is a bit faster, et cetera, et cetera. If you really are into the historical analogy there, I think it makes sense. So here's another one, the Starstalker. And I had discovered this a long time ago and sort of rediscovered it relatively late. This wasn't at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. This wasn't in the presentation. This went into the presentation at about 5:30 or so. It was in the book Starfleet Prototype. I was looking for some other illustrations because I was working on the dreadnought presentation for next week, and I found this and I went, oh. It also has a lower down strut, although it's not that routine detachable type. It also has a Knox class as its primary hull, but this thing has some extra photon torpedo tubes as well. It's got, it looks like it's got 4 forward firing tubes and 2 rear firing tubes. That's a lot of photon torpedo tubes. And it is in universe. This is one of the things that sort of bugs me. In universe, it's supposedly designed by Montgomery Scott because he kept taking notes during all the incidents that happened in the original series, and he was very cognizant of the fact that there never seemed to be enough power for the phasers, and that was the Achilles heel of that design, was that the primary weapon took so much power, and photon torpedoes take a lot less power, so maybe there should be more photon torpedoes. And it always drives me crazy because I think that everything has to be tied back to, if it's a ship-related thing, it has to be tied back to Montgomery Scott. If it's a tactics-related thing, it has to be tied back to James T. Kirk. There's just way, they specifically came up with this alloy because of in such and such an episode, they encountered these people and they got this special alloy, and now we make ships out of it. And there are other people in this universe, right? They're not the only people there. And the Starfleet prototype book, which I think, if I remember correctly, is David Schmidt, that book seems to be more inclined to do that stuff and sort of tie everything in than some of the other ones do. That I'm to be honest, I'd be perfectly happy if none of the material ever mentioned the existence of the Enterprise or anybody that we had ever heard of. I'd be perfectly happy with that. But it is an interesting design. You can see that it's sort of spiritually, it's got a lot of the same ideas. There are a ton of ones out there that take either a Knox class or a Miranda class and slap it in as the primary hull, and now you've got all these extra hangar bays, etc. There's a lot of designs like that, and I purposefully sort of limited it to just a couple that I thought had more merit, and this is one of the ones that I think has more merit, even though I don't particularly like the backstory. Okay, so why not? Here's some speculation things. Why not think about the ATHABASKA class as a battle cruiser? Now, I mentioned previously that I think the term is overused, and and it's mostly because I don't think people understood exactly why battle cruisers came about and what they were. And I am not saying, I am 110% not saying that the Brits invented the only way that you can use the term battle cruiser, and that if you're not using it the same way as them, then you're wrong. Not saying that at all. I am saying that everybody seems to be including battle cruisers, I would argue, because they knew that the Brits had them in World War I. They thought they were kind of sexy. And so if you're going to do that, if you're going to be inspired by them, you should at least understand what they were for. And battle cruisers in that time period were basically, because of hydrodynamics, there's effectively a top speed on a hull design. You get to the point where, like, you can double the amount of boilers that are providing steam. You can double the size of your engineering plant, and it leads to a marginal improvement in speed, in steam, and hence in speed. And as a result of that, when the Brits designed battle cruisers, they basically had this pretty emphatic trade-off between the size of their engineering plant and everything else that they could put on the ship. And so the battle cruisers had about the same armament as a dreadnought battleship, about a little bit less, but still all big guns, comparable. But it had significantly less armor. And instead of putting its mass towards armor, put its mass towards engineering plant. Now, there are other people that will talk, like Dr. Alex Clark. He makes the argument that it was actually cruiser type subdivision is as big a deal as anything else. Is that it really sort of had a different. They thought about compartmentalization differently. Okay, roger that. I'll take his word for it. I'm not a naval engineer. Haven't studied enough naval engineering to historical naval engineering to assess that. So, but could very well be true. But I think in this context, I'm willing to use the term battle cruiser because it sort of meets some of the fundamentals, right? It has upgun capability, so it's more than just a cruiser. And especially that Icarus one, I would also say the Icarus one would be a good battle cruiser as well, right? Because it's got more power, more engines. And so from that standpoint, I could kind of see this as like you've got a cruiser version and you've got a battle cruiser version, then you've got a dreadnought version, all uses the same pieces parts, right? So it's clear that there was a new every now and then, Starfleet has this new technology development area where they develop a new set of engines. And when they develop a new set of engines, they develop a new set of everything else to go around along with those engines. And so at this time period, they had developed this new set of engines and they were building pieces, parts off of it. And hey, that's great if you can standardize and you can just sort of crank them out. Because remember, Starfleet has a much different problem than the US Navy does. The US Navy does not have to worry about the ocean getting any bigger, whereas the area that Starfleet is patrolling is constantly getting bigger as the Federation expands. To say nothing of the fact that if you think you're going to fight a war with the Klingons, maybe you should be prepared for it. And so the US Navy, sometimes it's bigger, sometimes it's smaller. But if you wanted to, you could sort of say like, hey, we're going to have a 500 ship Navy, 400 ship Navy, and when we decommission one ship, we'll replace it. And you're covering the same amount of water. That probably works. Starfleet doesn't have that option. Starfleet needs more ships all the time. And so the economies of scale you can get by reusing the primary hull design. Hey, you flight tested it. You've done all the stress testing, et cetera, et cetera. Just keep on reusing that. Keep on using the same engines, et cetera. Wouldn't be, if everything uses the same engines, you can just swap them out, right? If you need to. So from that standpoint, that kind of works. I'd also like to point out the alternate pylon assembly idea from last week. I mean, this is from Starship Design, the same magazine intended as a journal, but it was a one-off thing, but it was intended to be like a Starfleet equivalent of International Defense Review or Jane's or U.S. Naval Institute Proceedings. And it had this little section where it talked about different warp engine assemblies. And the top one was the one that was going to be on the Federation class, the dreadnought, which we'll talk about next week. And the claim is they ended up going to the middle one because it was just easier to build, and it got the cross struts away from the hangar bay. And all of that is true. I think it is not as interesting a design. And I kind of really like that pylon design because I think the routine detachable thing is, I still don't see the real value of it. Yeah, I guess if for some reason I needed to put new warp engines on, I could probably do it faster if I could just detach the entire assembly and put another assembly on. I'm not arguing that point. I'm arguing that how often do you need to do that? Like really, seriously, how often do you need to do that? I would put that consideration at the very, very bottom of my list of things to design around. And I think that the top pylon location basically would bring it in because the main navigational deflector is located high in the secondary hull because of the slope on the front of the secondary hull. Those pylons are basically coming in to the axis that would run right through that main navigational deflector, which I think probably is where you have a warp assembly, right? It totally makes sense to me that you would do that for reasons that I've explained in a couple of shows, including last week. So once again, I like that. I like it enough that I'm mentioning it 2 weeks in a row. And the other thing is that, okay, so you've got this ATHABASKA with the primary hull that comes from a Knox class. Does it make sense to do it with a Miranda class instead of a Knox class? Okay, it's bigger, right? More mass, maybe a performance hit. Maybe I want to do that with the Icarus class. Maybe the Icarus class gives me, because I've got 4 engines, so I can take the extra mass and not take the penalty, the speed penalty. Okay, that might work. That might work. So this is what it actually looks like if you decided you wanted to put an Avenger class or a Miranda class primary hull on an ATHABASKA. Now, what I did here was, on the right, you see the 2 illustrations. One of the things on Cygnus X1. Have I mentioned the Cygnus X1 website? On the Cygnus X1 website, one of the products there is just silhouettes. And so I took it's a ship recognition silhouette thing. And so I took the silhouette of the ATHABASKA class and put a Miranda over the top of it and scaled them so that the width of the primary hull is the same. So I got them on the same scale. And so that's kind of what the plan looks like. Ignore the engines that are left over from pasting it on top of it. Couldn't get rid of the engines, but that's what you end up with. Now, part of the question is, do you want to keep that roll bar? I've always thought the roll bar is sort of problematic because, as near as I can tell, that roll bar has to carry some form of antimatter from wherever the antimatter is stored up to the photon torpedoes so that you can inject it into the photon torpedoes, because those things don't just sit around loaded with antimatter. I believe everything we've seen indicates that they get a squirt of antimatter from the main supply when you get ready to fire them. And so the roll bar has always struck me as being a little bit problematic. And also, does that torpedo room have people in it? If that torpedo room has people in it, how do the people get there? So though that's always bothered me about the Miranda, but I kind of like it. The other question is, what's the mission? Why do you need a Miranda as opposed to a Knox class? You know, the Knox class, I get it. You got some extra hangar bay space, et cetera. And you know, I'm a big believer in extra hangar bay space, right? Because I don't have to put shuttles in there. I don't necessarily think that you need to bring 30 shuttles with you, but a hangar bay is also a warehouse. You can put whatever you want. You can put modules in there. You can put barracks for Marines. You can put all sorts of things in a hangar bay. A big empty space like that is something that I can use. I say this as a guy who has a storage unit in Ohio that I occasionally have to go back and get stuff out of. So wouldn't it be great if you had that extra space? So I can see why you would want that extra space, and I can see what you would use it, that it would be useful, but I don't specifically have hey, what's the requirement that says that I really kind of need that? Okay, I'm going to do questions in just a second, but next week, we're going to look at the Ascension class dreadnought. We're going to look at other dreadnought designs that are all the 3-engine dreadnought stuff, but we're not looking at that thing that they call the dreadnought in the second J.J. Abrams movie. We're just not. No desire to look at J.J. Abrams. And then we're going to look at one other, I think it's only going to be one other 3-nacelle design. I thought about just looking for 3-nacelle designs, and maybe I'll pull a couple of other ones in, but the one I'm going to talk a little bit about is USS Tritium from the Spaceflight Chronology, which has the advantage of, at least at one point, it was canon. And it has the explanation as to why they don't do 3-nacelle designs. And I've got some thoughts on, okay, maybe they didn't do 3-nacelle designs, but maybe it makes sense for them to do them now. So that's what I'm going to do next week. Okay, I've been watching off to one side, off to my right here. I've been watching, people have been posting and posting and posting. So I'm scrolling back up to the top. And let's see what we got. And let me remove that. And we'll see here. Okay. We're going to skip the entire bit about people seeing deer in their yard and all the rest of it. It all sounds great. Not about starships. I'll wait until the part where I started. Okay, there. Okay, hello, Merle. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm not sure what Dustin was saying here. Sometimes you just have to improvise. Yep, sometimes you just have to improvise. Sometimes you just have to improvise. Wright said that when Bill Krause builds a starship, it's now canon. I can believe that. He does some really good work. I like his stuff. So, and I love that book, and I'm looking forward to meeting him someday. I'm hoping he's going to be at Wonderfest. Why does the Belknap class look to be a slightly ugly but brutal class? I don't. Yeah. I think the thing I kind of get where the slightly ugly comes from, because I don't particularly like, as witnessed by the fact that I keep talking about the pylons and moving them. I don't particularly like that down low connection. I like where that puts the engines on the side, right? I think it's that low slung look I kind of like a little bit. And it also, one of the things that I didn't say it while going through this, one of the things I really like about the ATHABASKA class is that it really makes sense to put that Knox class primary hull attached to the Belknap secondary hull. It really makes sense to do that because you don't have the engines getting in the way of the hangar bays, right? That's one of the things why every now and then you see somebody puts a Knox class or a Miranda class on like a Constitution, and it's like, I wouldn't want to have to fly through all that shit. Now, okay, yeah, there's tractor beams. I mean, no pilot in a shuttlecraft is going to be, you would think, is doing a dead stick landing, right? I would think that the right answer is there's a tractor beam that catches them like 100 miles out, basically tows them in. So, okay, that's how it would be if it was really working. But in the case of the ATHABASKA class, it's like you've added this extra stuff on the back end of the primary hull. And it works because it doesn't conflict with the back end of the cruiser, right? It doesn't conflict with the back end of the Belknap in the way that some of that other stuff would. So from that standpoint, I think I really kind of like that, the ATHABASKA, because I think it just makes so much sense, right? I hope the guy who thought of that for Starfleet got a performance award that year, because he deserved it. So Patrick Ross said something about she's battling evil in another dimension. Oh, that must have been where that must have been about Lissa. Yes, quite possible. I mean, Lissa battles evil in multiple dimensions. So, when she comes back next week, you should all comment on that. And we'll see how long it takes her to figure it out. Yeah, there's some wonderful renders of the Belknap. There's some great ones there. There's some great ones of the ATHABASKA. There's just some wonderful stuff there. A lot of it's done by Adricel. There's some others that, I mean, part of the thing is when you go looking for this stuff, you can sort of get a feel for when stuff was done by just the resolution on it. It's like, that design comes from about 1993. I can tell by the resolution of it, whereas the other stuff is just beautiful. Okay, so Dustin asks, Constitution class, what are the strengths and weaknesses of it compared to the Belknap class? Well, so, there's the stuff that they talk about, and then there's the stuff that I can sort of point to myself. So the stuff they talk about is the claim is that it's a cheaper to produce alternative because it masses less. It's got a smaller secondary hull, etc. It's got the routine detachable nacelles, which they seem to think is a big deal. I think it could be useful in certain situations and probably makes, I could see a situation where if it took longer to do your engines than it did the rest of the ship, wouldn't it be great if you could detach your engines, put new engines on, finish up the rest of the ship in about 2 weeks, and now you're done with your major refit, right? If most of the overhaul is the engines, then I can see just you've got a couple of spare engines and USS USS Alice comes in, and the USS Bob's engines are ready to attach to the USS Alice, and USS Alice's come off. And then when Charlie comes in, Charlie gets the engines that were the Alice engines, but they've been refurbed over the time period. And I'm not talking about like random visits to star bases. I'm talking about, my expectation is that after every, say, 5-year mission, you probably go into the shipyard for some long period of time, 6 months, a year, something like that. And so if you could cut, say, if you could take a year-long refurb and turn it into a 6-month refurb, that might be worth it. That might be worth it. So the claim also is that the Belknap it's got the same size engines, but mass is less in that it's faster, and that it was sort of optimized for speed, and that it's also got, I think it's got actually a bigger weapons fit. Now, it's clearly going to pay for that. And, looking at it, I see the place where it pays is it probably doesn't have the endurance. And I'll be honest, there's a couple of different places that have stats for this thing. I didn't really pay much attention to it. I read the backgrounds when I got to the table that had all the stats, because the FOSSA stuff has stats that are in FOSSA's terms. They'll tell you exactly what engine's on it, and that engine is valid for FOSSA. The Ships of the Starfleet has its own table, and it's valid for that. Starship Design has its own table, and it's valid for that. Those last two are both Todd Guenther, so they're probably both the same. But my point is that everybody has their own stats for it, and I just decided I wasn't going to play referee on that stuff. It just wasn't worth trying to sort it all out. I'd rather sort of do the big picture view, because I don't think that any one set of those stats is necessarily better than the other. And, I don't think the value that I bring to this endeavor is the fact that I can read the stats and sort of decide which stats I believe in, which ones I don't. It involves sort of a bigger picture. It's not something I can do just with regard to the ship. I kind of have to do it with regard to the various universes out there, various versions of it. So, but it does make sense that it has more phasers, because that seems to sort of be the write-up as to why it exists. It kind of makes sense that it'd be somewhat faster, and especially if they were designing something that looked more like a warship. Maybe I don't need the same endurance, because I'm kind of assuming that I'm fighting in the Federation, right? It's a quick reaction thing, but it's really sort of more of a strategic defensive thing, as opposed, it might be tactically offensive, but it's more strategic defensive. So it doesn't need to have that extra endurance, and as a result, it doesn't need to have all the pod bays, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe. So when I sort of look at the Belknap versus Constitution, those are the sort of trade-offs I see. And it clearly doesn't have that arboretum or whatever it is that those big windows low in the secondary hull have, right? It clearly doesn't have that. Good. I don't think we need the arboretum. Yeah, Wright asked, did we mention X1? Cygnus X1. Cygnus X1, really good site. Yeah, Al says, I think it's more like the Belknaps are more specialized in the Connies. I think that's exactly it. They basically took the Constitution mission set and said, we can cross this one off and we can cross this one off, and we'll accept lower capability in these other things, and we're going to really kind of maximize this. So I think they were deleting missions. And then they said, okay, this is the mission that's left. What do I need to do to make that better? And if you're primarily focused on sort of the military aspects of it, if you've put more of an emphasis on that, then maybe some more phasers and maybe a better phaser field of fire, etc. And also, it's worth remembering this entire idea that they took one of the old Enterprise, that they took the Enterprise, one of the old Constitution class ships, and made this hugely radical change is kind of, I would say it's unrealistic, except it's happened in the past. And every time something like that has happened, it's been either the engineering guy, the engineering turned out to be way more difficult than they thought it was, and they ended up doing a lot more with it than they thought they were going to. Or it's something like the cruiser Belknap, which had this tragic accident happen. And it's like, well, you know, we can kind of just rebuild this ship and in the way that we want, and we'll just cut away the old stuff and we'll rebuild the ship and we'll get more out of it. Okay, I can see that. That's not what happened at the Enterprise, obviously. Or the third one is that it's something political. There's a famous story in the U.S. Navy in the early 20th century, I think it was, the ABC cruisers, something Boston, Atlanta, Boston, and Chicago, I think, where basically, as near as I can tell, what they did is they detached the ship's wheel, threw away the rest of the ship, built a new ship, and attached the wheel back on. And they said, it's the same ship, because they got authorization from Congress to modernize these ships. And they modernized them by throwing them away and building a new ship. Same thing has happened with the F-18 Hornet and the Super Hornet. They look kind of similar and they share some parts, but if you've ever seen a picture of two of them side by side, they are not the same airplane. If you've ever seen a picture of the plan view, the Super Hornet is a lot bigger than the Hornet. It's a lot bigger. The spot on a Super Hornet, the amount of time, space it takes up on the deck of a carrier, is equivalent to an F-14. It takes up the same amount of space. So Super Hornets are huge compared to the regular Hornet. And, you know, a lot of people in Congress knew that. Yeah, it's an improved version. Yeah, sure it is. And so sometimes this is done with a wink, wink, nudge, nudge from Congress. So I imagine something similar happened in Starfleet. There was probably some, you know, hey, we can't get rid of the Enterprise. She's done all this really great work. That's at least part of the story, is that there was this, they were going to just scrap it. And there was this upwelling and they said, okay, so what can we do? Well, we could use it as a test ship for this. And so let's go ahead and do that. All right, maybe not. But okay, let me, let's see. How many ships does it take to support or back up the Constitution class ships? We don't know, because we never really saw them used that way. We see them that used that way in Next Gen, right? You see Excelsiors doing the mail run out to the Enterprise, right? All the time, right? There's like the same captain is the same guest star, shows up in like 4 or 5 different episodes as the captain who's sort of like bringing somebody out to the ship or bringing them the mail or has news from Starfleet or something like that. You see that support role happening. You don't ever see that support role in the movie era, because, I mean, the movies just aren't really sort of set up for that day in, day out sort of approach. And so we can sort of guess that it's there. I think that that's what's going on in Wrath of Khan. I think the Miranda is doing a follow-up survey. The part that just baffles me is that they didn't know exactly where they were, right? It's like, and that it's like, because you don't just go like, okay, I'm going to count how many planets out. Oh, it's the third planet. I'll go to the third planet. Like the first thing that would have happened when they walked into the system is the computer would have said, there's something wrong here. There seems to be a planet missing, or something like that, right? So that part was not particularly, I had a hard time pressing the I believe button on that. But the thing that is kind of nifty about that episode is that you sort of see the Miranda doing the follow-up work, right? I think the Miranda was designed to boldly go places where man has been at least once and probably multiple times. Still going boldly, but that's really kind of more what they're designed to do. And with a lot of follow-up survey equipment, you know, maybe that's why they have hangar bays, is because they've got deployable stuff. And also they function as the cop on the beat in the inside of the Federation. The Connies were sort of in the exploration zone, functioning as the marshal on the frontier, whereas the Mirandas are more the cop on the beat. They're the guys that are there to provide some defense in depth in case the Klingons come over the border or something like that. That's my take on it. Next week, we will fear God, but dread not. Yeah, Starfleet Prototype is an absolute great book. You'll remember from last week, I pointed out there are two different versions of it that have very similar covers. They're both red with one is red with silver sort of stripy writing, and the other one is red with white writing. And they're a little bit different form factor, but they're, and one, as near as I could tell, is only available as a PDF. And it drove me nuts that Chris Wallace decided to just duplicate David Schmidt's form factor. In fact, I think it even has the same date on it. I don't understand. And they did that with Ships of the Starfleet too. So there's a whole bunch of follow-on things that you think are basically, oh, they extended the series, and it's like, no, it's an entirely different thing by a different group of people. Why are you doing that? I don't have a good feel for why they did that. It might be some fandom politics thing. Do Belknap type Starfleet generally? I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, other than it's about torpedoes. Belknap class ships, the straight up Belknaps have the same number of torpedo tubes as the Constitution. It's unclear as to whether they carry more or less torpedoes, because it's unclear as to where you put those torpedoes. Although the guy from We Travel by Night, he did, and I probably need to go and do, because I did a torpedo room thing. I probably need to go, since he's done some more work on that. He actually figured out that, yeah, there's actually probably plenty of room in the dorsal to put a bunch of torpedoes in there. Now, I'm not sure that's where I would want to store them. I always had a little bit of an issue with that torpedo room location. But his conclusion was there actually is enough space there to just rack them along the wall. I need to go back and rewatch that with a little bit more in depth and maybe some blueprints out and see if I really believe that or not. So, Thomas, yeah, let's talk about that. I don't think that, so Dustin asks, how much more cargo can the Belknap type ships carry? I don't think they can. Now, the Athabasca has those extra hangar bays, and so you could put some cargo in there. But I think that's the entire point. I think the Constitution carries a lot more. If you think about those big, I can't think of the name for it, when the big map paintings of the cargo area in the Constitution, it's huge in the motion picture. It's a huge cargo area. And you see some of that in the cutaway that I showed last week for the Belknap. You kind of see where that is, a lot smaller area. So the Belknap's carrying a lot less, which is exactly what you think, because it's got a much smaller secondary hull. And it also has the disadvantage that because it mounts at the bottom, it's got to pipe plasma through the secondary hull to the bottom. One of the advantages of the Constitution II class is it's got a warp reactor, vertical warp reactor at the front, and it goes up to the top of the secondary hull, goes straight over, and then goes to the engines. And so it gets to avoid all that stuff. It doesn't have to cross through the main body of the secondary hull, whereas in order to get to those warp pylons, those engine pylons on the Belknap, it does have to cross through all that stuff. And so that also is probably going to limit what you can do there. But it's not immediately clear what the exact numbers are. Oh, yeah, this is funny. I think I've seen this. Patrick Ross talks about the Overkill class. It looked like it was a 12 nacelle design, but it was a 3 nacelle ship designed to transport 9 nacelles to the shipyard from the builder. I love that. I love that. I want to say somebody did an illustration of a cargo tug pod with engines in it. I can't remember if that was a Franz Joseph thing or not, but the idea is that you could have a pod full of warp engines doing that job. Okay, Olive says, Doesn't make me want to think this one flies with Belknaps and brings Marines engineers for trouble response, complementary ship to deliver or evacuate people. Yeah, I think he's talking about the ATHABASKA. Yeah, I could see that. I could see that. This is one of the things. There's at least one book that is a fandom book that got put out for the FASA stuff that lists, like, there's 15 different types of cruisers there, and it's really kind of crazy that they have 15 different types of cruisers. Especially since they all say they have special gear to do that particular mission. That's not really how you design ships. You have a handful of special ships that do stuff, and then you got a bunch of stuff that are more general, and they may have a warfare area that they specialize in, but you really don't try to do it. You don't try to make them so specialized that they can't do other jobs. You'd rather just sort of have a bunch of general ships that can go and do stuff. So we have a mystery guest who's come into the backstage. I will let the mystery guest decide whether the mystery guest wants to jump on the show, but the mystery guest is always welcome to jump on the show if the mystery guest should decide to do that. Oh, I guess that's a yes.
We'll take that as a yes.
Yeah. I wasn't going to just throw you up.
Oh, that's fine. That's why I jumped in.
Come on, but
I jumped in just for a promotion here.
Go for it.
I need everyone to go and sign up right here for this is for the notifications for the documentary that's going to be launching a Kickstarter at the end of this month on the same day as we launch premiere The Gathering Storm. And this is the group with John Ottman, the Academy Award-winning director of Bohemian Rhapsody, and Seth Sherman, who's executive producer of Shark Week, and he's got a new show. Matter of fact, he just told me he's got his new show called Squatters, which is on A&E, and I guess it's a big hit. Anyway, they're going to be doing a documentary about the history of Axanar. They're launching a Kickstarter. We're helping them out as much as we can. So if you guys go here to this vip.axanar.com and just sign up, and if you, it's one of those things, you just sign up, you'll be notified when the Kickstarter launches. And if you sign up for $1, if you give them $1, then you get $25 off the signed and numbered Blu-ray and the free Axanar veteran patch that is going to be they're going to be selling in this. So it's a really good deal. So you should absolutely sign up. And there you go. So that's where I dropped by.
Okay, that sounds good. I am on the website now, but I'm at the point where it requires a lot of typing, so I'm not going to do that now.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it. Yes.
You started to say something. What was?
I'm sorry. Say that again.
Yeah, I think you were going to ask me a question or something.
Yeah. So what have you been talking about?
We've been talking about, so last week I talked about the Belknap class cruiser.
Oh, yeah. Love it. Love it.
Yeah. So I did an entire episode on the Belknap. Tonight I'm doing the ATHABASKA class. Do you know about the ATHABASKA class?
No, which one is that?
That's not it. That's what I'm going to do next week.
That's the Ascension.
So the ATHABASKA, let's go back here.
Oh, that's nice.
No, that's the Star Stalker. Talked about that. This is the Icarus. Look at that, 4 engines and 8 photon torpedo tubes. Okay, let's go back to the ATHABASKA.
Why does it have to have 4 engines if it's a torpedo boat?
Because more.
Because more.
Okay, so the ATHABASKA is the one on the right. And so basically it's a Belknap class, except they replace the primary hull with a Knox class frigate primary hull. And so they get, and the Knox class is what later, when they decided that they hadn't quite gotten it right, they made the Miranda class by extending the primary hull back and giving them some extra space. And so basically this has some more combat capability, and it's got what I really like is that it's got the extra hangar bays because, you know, give me lots of storage space. I can do stuff with storage space.
Very cool. Okay, that's cool. That's cool.
And so that's been the topic for tonight is the ATHABASKA, and plus also things like Oh, there you can see the Knox versus the Miranda.
Oh, very cool.
They extended it a little bit, and so they got a lot of extra stuff there. But
Gotcha.
I like the Icarus, like the Starstalker. And so next week I'm going to talk about various dreadnoughts with 3 engines.
Gotcha. Yeah. Dustin asks, was my opinion of the Federation Belknap family of ships? Yeah, I love them. I absolutely love them. I mean, I definitely need a 1/350th scale USS Ascension. Absolutely. I would take that over an Enterprise.
I suspect that somebody probably makes it.
Oh yeah, well, one of my and I've definitely seen them. There's conversion kits. I just don't have one. Yeah.
Well, maybe come say, I don't know, January, you'll have the time to do that.
Yeah, I know, huh? That'll be nice. Although I'm not a good enough modeler to do all that painting and all that.
Oh, I'm horrible.
I'll hire someone.
Yeah.
I'll hire someone. So, well, anyway, thank you. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Appreciate the ability to drop by. And I worked all day clearing out, in case you see it, all these orders. People, those are the challenge coins. And if you haven't gotten your free challenge coin yet, go to the website, go to the store. You only have to pay $4.95 shipping and handling. So you got one, right? Did you get one?
I don't think I got one.
Oh, I'll send you some.
I've been thinking that I need to order some Galileo blueprints too. So
Geronimo class, you mean?
Or Geronimo.
Well, yes, you do. All right, my friends, I'm out. I'm going to sleep. Bye, y'all.
Yeah, we're almost done. So see you later.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, let me go ahead and turn that banner off. There we go. Okay. VIP.axonar.com. I'll try to put it back up at the end. Okay, so let me go back to comments because I was working my way through here. Randall Wong says Starfleet is like military that does other stuff. Coast Guard does other stuff while being armed. I think Starfleet sometimes is a military that does other stuff, and I think Starfleet is sometimes an exploration service that also does military stuff. I think it varies based upon what the Federation needs at any given time. And the other thing is, like we've seen Starfleet from the time of Enterprise through the time of Voyager and Deep Space Nine, right? I understand that some people might have done some other show that had some other time period that I don't care about. I'm not prepared to talk about it, so I don't. But I mean, we've basically seen Starfleet over the course of about 400 years. There is no organization that is the same organization over the course of 400 years. The closest thing is maybe the Catholic Church, and that's about it. And I don't even think that's true. And so from that standpoint, I think it really does vary depending upon what they need at any given time. So Patrick Ross asks a very important question. Did the nebula keep the bowling alley? I'm not sure that a galaxy has a bowling alley. And boy, I hope it doesn't keep the bowling alley. I don't know. It was always so silly that they put a bowling alley in anyway. It was always so silly, especially like it was a 4-lane bowling alley. How bored do you have to be? You're on a starship. You're boldly going. I got to go play. I got to go bowl. You're boldly going. You're bowling going. Okay, never mind. I think the Belknap class definitely had to give up the bowling alley. I think that's definitely the case. Yeah, it looks like the Athabasca has 3 shuttle bays. It does. It does. It has one on the secondary hull, like you would expect, and then it has the other 2. And I could see a situation where, maybe one is used for something. It's like that's the dedicated one we use for X. Like that one we all have, we only do cargo in, or we only do maintenance, or that's the one that has the work bees that go out and do any maintenance stuff. That one goes out of those, and the other one is like we keep that one. That one has a ready alert shuttle to go do rescue stuff or something. I can see all sorts of different ways that you could split it up. And the other thing is that you can do maintenance on the door, et cetera, if you've got the ability to sort of like shift all the operations someplace else. This is one of the things that a large flight deck gives you on an aircraft carrier, is that it gives you the ability to like, oh, the catapults broke. Well, we'll use the other ones. If you only got one, then you're kind of limited. If the catapult's broke, it's broke. If you got four, you can just ignore the broke one, and you can work on the broke one while you're doing flight ops with the other ones. You probably need to. They're basically two pairs. You probably, if one of them's broke, the other one in the pair is probably not usable while you got guys out trying to work on it. So, okay, let's see. Dustin points out to a ship that has even larger cargo bays than the Avenger Mirandas. Yeah, there's a lot of fan designs that just sort of go nuts and just sort of keep extending it backwards. Patrick Ross points out that Miranda is better armed than the Constitution. Yeah, it's got those big ass mega phaser things that shoot forward and aft, and it's got more photon torpedo tubes, and it seems to have some other capabilities too. I mean, there might be more phaser emplacements that aren't necessarily just jumping out at me right now. And so that's one of the reasons why I think it's got a different mission. I think its mission is to sort of, it's not designed to be fast. It's designed to have a lot of capability and go and do follow-up missions. And oh, by the way, if the balloon goes up, it's designed to immediately transition over to being a full-up military vessel. The Constitution put, when they were rolling up the character for the Constitution, it put more of its points into propulsion. The Miranda is slower, but it's got a lot more capability in a lot of other ways. Yeah, there's Randall Wong talks about the specific Miranda variant that has the funky turrets on it that you see in the episode with Fraser Crane as the captain. I'm drawing a blank on the actor's name right now, with the time loop. And so it's I never particularly liked that design specifically because I thought those phaser turrets, or whatever those turrets were, I thought they were just wrong for the universe. It's clear that they said, we need something that differentiates this, although I don't understand why they did. They could have just used a stock Miranda. There wasn't any, it's not like they fired those weapons. They didn't need those weapons. So why are they messing around with them? I don't understand. Olive points out maybe they use maybe they still have that extra warp core, and now they've got a secondary power source dedicated to power the phasers. That's actually a really good idea. I really kind of like that. It's nice having phaser power. Okay. Yeah. You just changed my headcanon. Got it. Thank you. And Dustin points out directly and tied in the main impulse engine thrusters. It is. I mean, if you look at it, it's sort of like there's a warp core, and then coming back from it, you see the fusion reactors for the impulse engines, and you can just sort of see it pipe over that way. So I think that's probably what's going on. Olive says Miranda has a basketball court. It's interesting that you mentioned that, because every United States aircraft carrier has a basketball court. It's called the hangar bay. Up on the wall, there is a scoreboard. And it says it's got home and away. And if they need to, Like if they're in port, if you're in port, you don't have any airplanes on board. If you're in port before deployment, right? If you've deployed, if you're at the point where you're getting ready to deploy, you've got all your airplanes. You might have your airplanes on board, but if you're just like you're just going out and doing ops and stuff like that, but you're still in the training cycle, you don't have any airplanes on board because the airplanes can't take off unless the ship is at sea, with the exception of the S3 Viking, which is out of the inventory. And so when they get close to land, when they're coming into, their deployment's over or whatever, or even when they're coming in for just a few days, like they're getting ready to deploy, but they're coming back for a few weeks, they will fly the airplanes off and they go land at their base, and then they've got all the maintenance stuff, et cetera, there, and they can continue flying because they have to continue flying. And so you've got this big empty hangar bay, and you can do things like play basketball in it. You can also play basketball on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier, or of a destroyer. You got to be really careful the ball doesn't end up going in the water. You spend a lot of time just making dives to get the ball so that the ball doesn't go in the water. I've also seen them play volleyball on the flight deck of an Arleigh Burke, but in that particular case, the ball was in a net that had a tether on it, which meant it was, in terms of volleyball stuff, it was like a horrible volleyball setup. But it did prevent the ball from going into the water. Regarding the Icarus, I think Patrick Ross says they let the Atlas class designers out of their padded room. I think I need to go look up the Atlas class. Maybe I don't want to go look up the Atlas class. So Dustin says, could the warp nacelle torpedo tubes be converted to take direct plasma from the warp nacelle stream to fire plasma torpedo or plasma charges? That, I think that's how some of not only are there Romulan weapons that work that way, I believe that there are Klingon weapons that theoretically work that way. And so, yeah, I suppose so. But those look like they're torpedo launchers. That's the thing, is they look like torpedo launchers. They don't look like something else. So. And the other thing is that the Federation has really kind of gone with phasers. That's the thing that they know how to do. So this would be them doing a different weapon that they don't really know how to do. Olive says maybe the extra stuff on that Icarus was meant to basically burn up some engines, unload some tubes for Alpha Strike, and then be pretty normal. I think by burn up engines, I don't know if you mean like we have extra engines laying around, so let's use them, or whether you mean that just means that you can ride your ship harder and don't have to worry about burning out the engines. Either one of those. I think the latter makes more sense. I think beyond a certain point, the extra engines doesn't make you faster. The extra engines just means that you've got some redundancy, and you may have a faster warp response. And it also, I think, means that you can, that you're not stressing the engines as much, because you're either cycling through, I'm kind of feathering this one, I'm not really using it, or everything's operating at a lower power level. One of the things that they tell you as far as aircraft design goes, if you want to make your engine last a long time, if you need an engine that has a power rating of 100, put in an engine that has a power rating of 120 and never run it above 100, and it will last forever. That the way that you burn out engines is you run them at their max capacity. So don't do that. Run them at 80% and just build a bigger engine, and your engine lasts a lot longer. So I think that may be part of what's going on there, but I do think it's also faster. Patrick Ross says you can never have enough photon torpedoes. Just ask the Andor class design team. Yeah, I'm a big believer in the idea that Andorians really like photon torpedoes. That was an old FOSSA thing. I've really kind of adopted it. And it's particularly of relevance because there's a Star Trek campaign game or a Star Trek role-playing game that's booting up that may eventually end up launching and that I'm going to play in, and I'm going to play in Andorian for exactly that reason, because of photon torpedoes. So Dustin says, how many of the Belknap type can be upgraded with the USS Defiant warp core? I have no idea. I mean, the thing is, well, actually I do. By the time the Belknap, or by the time you have the Defiant, the Belknap is old. I don't think there are any around. I think you see Mirandas, and I think you see Excelsiors, because they built a metric shit ton of each. And as a result, they're such a huge part of the fleet that they didn't decommission them. Just like we're doing with KC-135s. We still have KC-135s flying. We're decommissioning all the KC-10 extenders. In fact, they may all be gone by now. But we're keeping the KC-135s going because we didn't have enough KC-10s to allow us to decommission the KC-135s. And, you know, not all airframes get used equally the same amount, and presumably all starships. You know, some of them get rode hard and put away wet. Some of them are very small classes. And so I have to keep at least some of the big class. And if I'm trying to rationalize the parts and expertise, maybe I want to do that. Maybe it's a design that it turns out it's like, yeah, these things break easier. The Mirandas are just like slabs of stone. You can't break them. Whereas the Belknaps were more like thoroughbred horses, and they can break. I'm just speculating on that, but I could easily envision a situation where the Belknaps aren't in the fleet, but the Mirandas still are. Same with the Excelsiors. There are some examples, I did not include any of them, of people that have designed like Miranda follow-ons that have ambassador class type warp engines attached to them. And so is that supposed to be an upgrade? I don't know. You could easily imagine a Belknap class like that. So I can believe any of those things as being the case. But when I look at things like the size of the fleet and what gets pulled out of the fleet and what stays in the fleet, et cetera, there's a lot of factors in the real world that go into that, and having to do with requirements and capability and how much life is left, et cetera. Like one of the reasons why the B-52 is still going strong is that it was a relatively crude design. It was a fast design intended to get in the air quickly to be an interim bomber until we got the B-58 Hustlers on board. And then it was going to be replaced by the B-58s. And then it was going to be replaced by the B-70s. And then it was going to be replaced by the B-1s. But they keep like doing things like re-engineering it and making all these mods to it, et cetera, because the airframe is so overbuilt that when they come in and they assess the structural strength of the airframe, they go, this thing's still good. Whereas some of the other stuff, you know, you start getting fatigue after a bit of time. And we built so many B-52s. Oh my God, there are parts around. You know, the new stuff doesn't have the parts, but the old stuff has the parts. Whereas with the B-1, we only built, I think, 97 of them. I think we built 100 and lost 3 fairly quickly. I forget how many are flying, but they're hard to keep in the air. They're a fantastic airplane, don't get me wrong. They're hard to keep in the air, and every time something breaks, they have to custom make the parts. Because it's not like there's a warehouse full of B-1 parts. There just isn't. And so if they can't get it off a bird in the boneyard, they have to custom make it. And so the maintenance on that thing is through the roof. I believe on a cost per flight hour basis, I think the B-1 is more expensive to fly than the F-22 because of that. It's a wonderful bomb truck. Okay, let's see. Okay, so could Starfleet been trying to play with warp core field shapes even back in the 2270s and 2280s, trying to slow down the spatial warp damage from? I don't think they knew about it. I mean, conceivably yes, but I don't think they knew about it. I think that at least in the canon, they didn't know about it. Well, who knows what was going on behind the scenes? In the show, they acted like they had just discovered it, but I'm sure that there was somebody who had been saying something about it before. Wright said something about the Des Moines class being a battle cruiser. Only 8 inches. Only 8 inches. I don't think even auto firing it counts because it doesn't have the penetration with an 8 inch. And it doesn't have the range with an 8 inch. Battle cruisers, Patrick Ross said, had a longer, thinner hull. Yeah, they were built for speed. They were actually, displacement wise, they were bigger than that first generation. Like the Invincible was bigger, had a greater displacement than the Dreadnought. So it's always dangerous when you talk about that generation of ships because there was a lot of changes. I mean, the changes were so much. Dreadnought comes out in like 1906, 1908. I can never keep straight which date it is. By the time World War I rolls around, she was a second-class ship. She doesn't fight at the Battle of Jutland because she's not considered a frontline ship anymore because there was a lot of issues with that ship. Habitability was low. There was, I want to say there was some seakeeping issues. There was a whole bunch of stuff. I saw a video recently that laid out a bunch of stuff that I didn't understand were issues previously. But yeah, they kind of came away and said, we can do better. We can, in addition to just obvious things like the gun layout meant that you couldn't do a full broadside. But there was a whole bunch of other things that they sort of went, this is problematic. Oh, one of them was, one of the gun director positions was like right behind the smokestack. So if they were making any sort of speed, the platform was uninhabitable because they were in the middle of the cloud of smoke coming off the smokestack. And so basically they one of their gunnery director positions was just unusable. So Dustin says that the Klingons called the Constitution II class a battle cruiser. That's actually gets to an interesting point. What they call their ship and what we call their ship aren't necessarily the same thing. It's been a while since I've talked about this in any detail, but if you look at what the U.S. intelligence community, mostly the Office of Naval Intelligence, uses to classify other people's ships, it doesn't match what they call their ships, and it doesn't match what we call what the U.S. Navy calls its ships. If you go by O&I standard, the United States Navy has 3, maybe only 2 attack submarines left. And that's because the Flight 3 LAs and the Virginias all have cruise missile tubes. And so they get classified as SSGNs. They also have all torpedo tubes, etc., but because they have the cruise missiles, they get classified as SSGNs. And so it's only the Seawolves, and I think it's only the 2 Seawolves that aren't the special mission sub. Maybe they classify the other one. They would classify the Jimmy Carter as also being a regular attack sub, even though it's got this special mission module. And so it's kind of weird in that regard that, but we use a different thing. There's something that the Chinese have a ship that we classify as a cruiser. They classify it as a destroyer. And you see this in the Honorverse, where the Havenites, their classification is based on size, whereas Manticore, the Royal Manticore Navy, bases their classification on mission. And so you end up with a situation where the Manties have a destroyer that's twice the size of a Havenite destroyer. And as a result, the Havenites would probably classify it as being some sort of cruiser. They certainly wouldn't classify it as a destroyer. So, okay. How often do Starfleet ships get the warp nacelles totally pylons blown off? I don't know that we've ever seen that. maybe I'm trying to remember if the ship that fought the Doomsday machine had one of its engines blown off. I can't remember if it did or not. Randall Wong talks about Germans calling armored cruisers that we called pocket battleships. And so that's an interesting topic. The entire, like, how do you design, what do you call those things? And the added question of what are they used for? There's actually a reasonably good argument that those ships were designed for the Baltic, that they were specifically designed to counter another class of ship. And, but a lot of people do that. We built the Alaska class to counter a specific class of Japanese ship. We didn't think we had anything that could quite handle it, so we built a special thing to handle it. And it turns out that we had misunderstood what the Japanese were going to do. But when the Japanese found out about the Alaska class, they changed their design. And so the only reason we needed the ship, they changed their design to be more like what we thought it was going to be. And so the only reason why we needed the counter was that we created the threat that they were trying to counter. Always interesting. Patrick Ross says the Klingons don't have a heavy cruiser class in their fleet. I don't know if they do or not. I don't know what their ship. I mean, they talk about us as being a battle cruiser, but is that really them? What's the word in Klingon? What's the Klingon doctrine look like? Or when they talk about it being a battle cruiser, is that because they're just putting it in Federation terms? Because they're talking, they're making the argument to Federation folks. I don't know. Olive says, I kind of figure on the Athabasca being there to match capabilities with a flight of Belknaps and then bring or remove the more ground. Yeah, maybe. I mean, yeah, they can. Yeah. So the idea here is that you've got something that's got to be able to, the Belknaps are fast. It's got to be able to keep up with the Belknaps. Okay, it's got more primary hull. Maybe it doesn't keep up with the Belknaps, but it gives you that extra ability to have a. You can maybe sort of think of the Athabasca as being like a Flight 2A Arleigh Burke, and the Belknaps are Flight A's or Flight 1s and Flight 2s, and the Athabasca is a Flight 2A. The Flight 1s and Flight 2s don't have hangar bays, don't have hangars for the helicopters. They have a flight deck, but they don't have a hangar. And so maybe what this is it's a hangar. It gives them that might be the right way to think about it. Are the Belknaps better maneuverable? I think that the original Todd Guenther source said that they were, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. I'm skipping a few things. Belknaps don't need a bowling alley. I agree with that. So Olive makes an interesting point. I figure that with this high tech, you can just reshape a lot of the old ship into a new ship easier than replicating or manufacturing all the new parts and stuff. I think it means that my take on Starfleet ships is that they have a lot longer life. That basically they don't wear out. They get to the point where you really can't upgrade them anymore. I don't think they wear out. I think they get to the point where it's like, yeah, we just can't fit the new tech in, and it would be too, the hull's made of the wrong material. The standards have improved. You get to some things you can't fix without basically throwing the whole thing away. And so like the hull strength is not what we need it to be. there's not room to make a bigger, it needs a bigger shield generator, and we can't fit one in. Even if we could, we don't have the power to power the new shield generator. You just sort of get to the point where you're upgrading stuff the entire time, and you eventually get to the point where you can't really do much anymore. Or at the very least, you get to the point where, yeah, I can continue building it, I can continue upgrading it, but it's going to be a second or third class ship. I think the last Excelsiors that came off the line looked nothing like the initial Excelsiors, and same with the Mirandas. I think they built Mirandas for a long time because it's a very useful ship. I think they built Excelsiors for a long time. And you see that in the real world all the time. And in some cases, you've got things like the Abrams tank, where every now and then they go and they refurbish it, which involves literally taking it apart, throwing some of the parts away, and then putting new parts in. When a tank comes in for refurbishment, like the tank hull comes in, it doesn't even have paint on it anymore. And they put a new turret or a refurbished turret on it with a new gun or a refurbished gun and new electronics, et cetera, et cetera. And it's so they're not really upgrading the tank. They're building a new tank with some parts that they scavenge from old tanks and have been very, very thoroughly gone through. And so I think that that's probably true with the Mirandas and the Excelsiors and some of the other stuff. They keep them around for a long time. The ones that come off the line at the end are not the same as the one that comes off at the beginning, and they spend a lot of time upgrading them, et cetera, et cetera. And so you end up with a lot more capability. The U.S. in particular has this tendency to keep weapon systems around and just keep recycling the name. Like the AIM-9 Sidewinder, a current Sidewinder bears little to no resemblance to the Sidewinder that first came out in the late 50s, early 60s. Just none. It kind of vaguely looks the same. And sometimes we have missiles that are the latest model that even don't look the same. The Patriot, for instance, a PAC-3 and a PAC-2 look nothing alike, but they fire out of the same launcher. Dustin points out, he makes the argument that a lot of people have made that the only Constitution II class that was a refurb of a Constitution I was the Enterprise. Everybody else was a new build. That argument has been made. I see no problems with that argument. It does kind of beg the question as to why you'd bother to do that, since, like, if you look at it, the primary hull isn't the same, the secondary hull isn't the same, the struts aren't the same, and the engines aren't the same. So near as I can tell, they kept the fixtures in the bathroom. That's about it. Yeah, right basically said what I said with regard to the APG-63 radar. By the time you finish improving it, it's really kind of a different thing. Dustin asks if there's any Belknap type ships in the Excelsior family. Not that I've seen. That doesn't mean they didn't exist. It just means that no fan has decided to run with that. Okay, so I'm skipping a few things. Yeah, Olive points out FASA and SFB tended to call things a frigate if they had Marines. And I think a lot of that is because they really seem to base things, Starfleet Battles is based upon Franz Joseph. And when Franz Joseph came out, a frigate was a ship between a destroyer and a cruiser in size. And FASA really seems to be sort of leaning towards in the U.S. Navy, And FASA kind of has this, in FASA terminology, a frigate is a ship that is bigger than a cruiser because it's essentially a cruiser that carries Marines also. And where you get that, I don't know, because that certainly isn't a historical approach. I don't know of any navies in the world that sort of said, like, yeah, frigate, that's where I put my troops. That's where I put my Marines. They all had Marines to some degree, shooting from the fighting tops. But I don't recall anybody saying, yeah, that's where I put my Marines. So in that aspect, it's kind of nifty. They did something that's a little different, but it is a little confusing. Oh, the Soyuz class. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Dustin earlier was referring to the Soyuz class. Okay. Thomas the Cat said the dialogue called for a Soyuz class in the script, and the art department scrambled to come up with something. I'm sure that's what it was. I'm sure that's what it was. Kelsey Grammer. Yes, it's Kelsey Grammer. Okay. The claim is that Michael, and I have no reason to doubt this, Michael Kuda did a napkin sketch of the changes for the Bozeman, which is the Soyuz class. His artist intent for the turrets were that they were telescopes and sensor antenna. I have to go back and take a look at them. They don't look like yeah, it looks like this is a case where by the time it got through the art department, like in Babylon 5 in Severed Dreams, the conceptualization was always that when an Omega class went to war, they froze the spinning section. They stopped it from spinning, and they got the cut, and they were spinning, and they went, shit. You know what? It actually kind of makes them look more sinister that they're doing that. And so they decided to keep it, even though their intent was that they were always going to, because it makes sense that you'd stop the centrifuge section from rotating if you're going into battle. The other thing with that episode is, it's my understanding that they actually got the cut together about 3 hours before airtime. That was just in time science fiction delivery. Okay. Yeah, a lot of discussions about the necks attaching the primary hull. I like the designs like the Sentinel done by Bill Krause, and the Ajax, the modified Ajax by Adrasil, that have the primary hull that if it's not just connected directly to the secondary hull, there's a thick squat neck there. I've never liked that. I've never liked the dorsal. I've always thought the dorsal looked like a weak point. Okay. Okay, still scrolling. Yeah, Wright points out that they both had the warp engine still attached, but both had heavy damage. Okay, that tracks. Wright says the bowling alley may have been an Easter egg or in-joke. I think, if I remember correctly, the claim was that there's an episode where they mentioned the bowling alley in the original series. And that's why Franz Joseph put it in, is that there wasn't, I can't tell you what episode it is. I don't know if it was true or not. Enterprises tend to die well before their time is done. They also do a lot more work than most Starfleet ships. It's because they're the only ship in the quadrant. That's the problem. They need to have more ships in the quadrant. Yeah, Olive says on the Enterprise refit controversy, maybe it's easier to take the old metals and they're closer to the new metals and shapes than ore is. So maybe they did literally use the ship. I think he's saying that they basically just sort of melted the ship down and built a new ship. I don't think that's quite what they did, but boy, there's nothing about those two ships that looks the same. Wright says, excellent chat tonight. Thank you very much, Wright. Yeah, Olive talks about, think of a tech where you can rearrange the molecules, feed an old girder in, out comes a new spec girder. Yeah, you still have to weld it all together, or however they get it together. Dustin said it'd be interesting to look at the different ambassador class ships. I think we've only seen one. Have we seen a second ambassador class? Maybe there was one at Wolf 359 because everything was at Wolf 359, but I only remember there being one ambassador class, and that was in yesterday's Enterprise. We saw lots of Excelsiors, and they seem to have a lot of differences here and there and stuff like that. I'm sure they tossed them out every now and then. So, but Olive says it was in The Naked Time that Kevin Riley made the reference to the bowling alley, and he was drunk at the time, so maybe he just made it up. So, okay, that brings me to the end. So it has been, okay, more on the bowling alley. I'm going to skip that. This has been, at the 102 mark, I went to questions. 102, 104, something like that. I went to questions. And we're at the 156 mark. I don't know that we've ever done a 2-hour show before, but we're getting real close, because this has been a very interesting, very robust discussion. And so thank you, everybody, for participating in the interesting, robust discussion. And if you're watching this at some point in the future, read the comments. I skipped a bunch. There's a lot of good comments in there. And so once again, as always, I say at the end of a show, thank you very much for spending your Saturday night with me. I am always just amazed that there's enough people that want to do that. I mean, we've got 18 people watching and we're 2 hours in. And so next week, we're going to do the Ascension class and the Federation class dreadnought and some other 3 nacelle ships. And I'm not going to do every 3 nacelle ship. I'm going to talk about those and sort of what their contextual background is. Maybe some follow-up from this one. We'll see what else I come up with for that. I decided I needed to do the ATHABASKA first, at least in part because you could always throw a 3rd warp nacelle on it. So at the very least, I'm going to talk about the idea of, like, maybe rather than using a Belknap as the basis, should I use an ATHABASKA as the basis for a dreadnought ship? So I'm looking forward to doing that next week. But in the meantime, thank you very much for spending your Saturday night with me. I appreciate it. And as long as you guys keep showing up, I'll keep doing it. And I will talk with you next week.